iHeartRadio presents Podversations, a weekly discussion with the biggest names and influencers in podcasting.
Hello, and welcome back to the iHeartPodcast Speaker Series. As you know, every week we like to get together with some of our favorite creators, some of our favorite podcasters, producers, talk a little bit about the world of podcasting, talk a little bit about their podcast. And today I'm super excited. We have two guests that are coming to us from our Next Up program. Now, we've talked a little bit about our Next Up program in the past with Anna Hosnier and Joelle Smith, the two creators of the Next Up program. But for those who haven't heard about it, it's an incredible program with the idea of finding emerging creators with brilliant idea for podcasts that are looking to take their concepts to the next level, are looking to learn from some of the best producers in the industry. And in many cases, these are producers and creators coming from underrepresented communities in the podcast space. And so it's been a really exciting program for us to launch. And we just finished up our first class. And so what's happening now is we have podcasts launching from some of these brilliant creators, two of them joining us for today's discussion. We have Jonathan Higgins from Black Fat Femme and Carmen Leroy from Beauty Translated. Thanks for joining us for a few minutes.
Yay. Thanks for having me.
I'm always excited to be here.
I know. I love chatting with both of you. Just both of you have blown me away from the very beginning. I think what was so surprising, not that we didn't expect to get some great applicants from the Next Up program, but you launch a program like this and you don't know exactly how it's going to go in the first year. And the creative thinking and the determination from these creators and the just honest genius that we saw from some of the applicants that have come in with this program have really just been so much fun to see. But Jonathan, I would toss to you first, just to get a sense of, first of all, how did you find out about the Next Up program and what made you decide to sort of throw your hat in the ring to try out for it?
Yeah. So I am always on social media perusing and looking for other opportunities to heighten my voice as a creator, specifically knowing that there aren't a lot of programs or spaces or places online that are openly trying to give marginalized people who look and live like me opportunity to use my voice. So I have different things that I have set, certain words, certain, things that I kind of just search on Twitter. And one of the things is that I actually follow Joelle. And so having Joelle set as a friend of mine on Twitter, I saw them post. And then again, I kept seeing it kind of come across my timeline. And I thought to myself, I was doing kind of this, I wouldn't call it I wouldn't say that it was a terrible podcast because it wasn't, but we were just doing a podcast where it was just me and another friend of mine talking. They ultimately had said, I don't really want to do this anymore. And so I was in the mind, when I had saw this, I was already in the mind of how do I continue to keep fueling my passion for the podcasting that we had been doing for almost 2 years, knowing that my old co-hosts didn't want to continue with the show, which was totally fair and totally understandable. So I see Joelle post this, I click on the link and I see I really only have a week to apply for it. I'm thinking, wow, why didn't I know about this sooner? I really just kind of start racking my brain and really thinking in a very quick way. And it wasn't like I was throwing something together. I kind of keep like a running list of like, what are story articles that I want to pitch? What are podcasts that I would love to, talk about or whatever. Long story short, I just 1, 2, 3. I had written down 2 other thoughts, and Black Fat Femme initially, which is the show we now have, was an idea that I had from a book. And I said, what if I could take this idea from a book, sell it as a podcast and it come to life? So it was a book idea I had been writing on and I had been working on. Long story short, I pitched it and I got the interview for Next Up, and they immediately opened up saying, tell me more about Black Fat Femme. And I was like, well, honestly, it was a book idea. I only had 2 major ideas up front. This was the third one that I could come up with. And I thought it felt good because I had been writing this book for for a couple of years. And that's the one that everyone kind of grabbed onto. And now we're here. So
I love it. Well, you fooled us into thinking you'd been thinking of this as a podcast for many years, because it was, the sort of the clarity of thought and the direction you were looking to take this. Actually, can you tell us a little bit about like how would you describe the mission of Black Fat Femme?
Yeah. Well, so really thinking about think about episode 1, the Yes Black, the Yes Fat, Yes Femme as our first episode title. And the reason why I titled the first episode that was, my story in kind of building this podcast. And a lot of people know this, a lot of people don't know this, or some people may not know this, but it kind of spawned from the first time that I told someone that I was interested in them. And the first thing they hit me with was, I don't date Black guys, I don't date fat guys, and I don't date femme guys. And so for years, I had kind of muddled on this idea of there's never really a place for Black fat femmes like myself. And when I say femme, what I mean is effeminate, cisgender presenting men, right? Effeminate people to exist. And so a couple years later, I don't know what ad it was, but there was another ad that someone was wearing a shirt that said no Black, no fats, no femmes. And so really just thinking about how in the LGBTQ community, specifically around cisgender men, there's this racism, there's this femphobia, there's this fat phobia that kind of just lives. And I really wanted to say, instead of me, I'm going to say writing because that's all I ever do is write. Instead of me building a podcast where I'm talking about how awful it is to be a part of the community, why not create a podcast where me and somebody that I'm really close to, we're talking about all the things that we love about ourselves and the thing that makes us as Black fat femmes amazing. And so that's really what the show has become. It's literally an hour of us just really giving ourselves the flowers that society doesn't want to give us, and really just kind of saying, instead of constantly harping on all of the terrible things that happen to us, because again, let's really think about it. Black, when you're Black, fat, or femme, those are all three things that the world, doesn't really want. It's really nice to be able to sit in front of a mic with someone who sees you and loves you and be able to talk to them in a way that's really not only honest, but also celebratory of your existence. So that's really what the show has become.
I do love that. And I love that. I mean, right out of the gate from episode 1, there's such an incredible dynamic and a rapport between the two of you. And it's so much fun to listen to. But I also like that while you do celebrate all the reasons to celebrate, you're also not afraid to hit difficult topics head on. And I think that's what resonates so much with your audience. And actually, Carmen, for you too, I want to toss to you next here that you're also celebrating the many things to celebrate, but realize there are several difficult things to talk about. Your first episode was just incredibly powerful, where I appreciated you took the time to step back a little bit and tell your story and sort of tell why you decided not just to start this podcast, but the whole journey that you've been on. And I'd like to get to that in a minute here, but curious how you found out about the program and your first thoughts and how you decided to, it's a bold move to throw your name out there and to say, I want to start this thing and I want to, apply for a thing that they're only going to choose 8 people for, but maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, like, my story is very different from John's in that way. But, I spent the last 10 years basically as an esthetician, not as a creator. And I hadn't really thought of myself as doing anything in like the creative sphere for a really long time. But during that whole time, I'm consuming podcast after podcast after podcast. And it all started with Stuff You Should Know. That was the first podcast I ever listened to. And the other daily podcast I listen to is the Daily Zeitgeist. And those both just happen to be on the iHeart network. But I was kind of at a point in my life where I realized, aesthetics is not fulfilling me anymore. And I need to explore a different career. I need to get in touch with who I am again. And it kind of lost sight of who I was like during that whole time. So it allowed me to kind of connect with who I am and all of that, while also just exploring the trans community. But anyway, I was listening to the Daily Zeitgeist, heard an ad for the Next Step program on the Daily Zeitgeist. And I decided, yeah, why not? I'll give it a shot. And I think they asked for, like, in the forum, they asked for 2 pitches. And the 2 things I pitched was, I would love to create a podcast about aesthetics, skincare, beauty related topics, because that's like a passion of mine. And the other thing I said was, I would love to create a podcast about the trans experience. And that was because at the time I didn't realize that there, I didn't see any podcasts that were talking about the trans experience at the time. And so since then, of course, I have found some, but none that were on like a major network.
Yeah.
So that's how I heard about the program. And when I had the interview with Joelle and Anna and Yesenia, I never expected that I was going to be here a year later, quitting my teaching job and doing something totally different, and I love it, and I couldn't be happier.
So glad you did. And it's one of the things that I didn't think a whole lot about before this program came together was the opportunity for the participants themselves, for the two of you and the 6 others who are part of the program, to really get to know each other over a pretty intense 6-month period, because within the program you have 6 months before you're even thinking about putting anything out in the world, where you're working with some of our producers, guest speakers coming in to talk to you about different parts of the podcast industry. But week after week, the only people that are there every week are the 8 of you, right? And I'm curious what that experience has been like. Maybe Carmen, I'll stick with you here for a second, just to talk about that experience of getting to know the other participants and what that bond has been like, and if you're still, communicating regularly today.
Yeah. So, of course, we had the 2 weeks of training during the Next Up, like the beginning of the Next Up initiative.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a bonding experience for sure, because we were all taking notes. People were sharing notes and stuff like that. And we were all double checking with each other on information. And then, once we found out that our shows were going to be picked up and be sponsored by Toyota, we, knew that we were going to go to, well, I don't think we actually knew until January, but it just happened. But yeah, so we went to LA in February to meet each other. And when we met each other in person for the first time, it felt like, for me, it felt like I knew everyone in the group for such a long time, even though I was meeting people from across the country, and I was in a place that I had never been in my life, which is crazy to think about, even just a few months ago. So it was a very eye-opening experience for sure, and definitely a bonding experience. And yeah, we keep in touch regularly. I would say once a week, somebody's in our group chat, hey, what's up?
That's fantastic. That support is so important. And as we talked about earlier, and John mentioned at the beginning here, whether it's a creator coming from a marginalized community, or just a creator who's putting something out in the world where you feel like you're creating something that you haven't seen in the space. And I'm guessing to some degree there must feel like a lot of pressure in some ways to feel like you're putting something out in the space that people have been looking for, right? There are other people with not identical but somewhat shared experiences as you that feel like they're looking for this. That's been one of the most striking things for me is reading some of the reviews for your podcast, just the stellar reviews for all of them, and you see that there has been such a desire for both of your podcasts, and it's moving to read both from people who felt like they identify similarly and feel like they were looking for something like this. But actually what's also been nice is, seeing some of the reviews from people saying, this has helped me think about how I can, whether we want to say be an ally or be someone who can just sort of be assistants in this world, that this has helped me think about that. And John, maybe I'll go back to you just to get your thoughts on putting something like this out in the world. Have you been hearing from listeners, and has it felt like a lot of pressure to put something out that you really don't see a whole lot of in the podcast space in terms of voices from such an underrepresented community?
Yeah. So, I think the pressure always lives in the back of your mind, especially when you're like me. And, I'm just going to say this outrightly, and everyone knows this about me. I'm very, very upfront with my lived experience. And I think one of the experiences that Black people, not even just Black queer people, but Black people have, is that we often have this pressure that everything we do has to be done well, or we won't get any more opportunities. Right. So there's this kind of regardless of whether people say, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. I went into this program being like, it has to be done right, or you might not get another opportunity to do this, or to tell your story this way. So there was not only that pressure, but I think there is the other pressure of too, or how is the world going to respond? And I think for myself, I know I have a very large following on social media. I know people know my name. I know people know a lot of the things that I've done, both past and present. And so there's also this worry of like, will people, am I going to get hit with negative mail? Am I going to get, negative hits? Are people, what are people going to say with me going to the mic and talking very openly about my lived experience with a lot of, and I'll say this, a lot of folks who don't identify as Black or queer, not fully understanding that experience. And I will say that in the last week, I've probably opened my podcast email and just ugly Oprah cried from, whether it be someone just sending a message and saying, oh my God, that episode had me screaming, laughing in my office, or someone saying, thank you so much for going there with this topic. Thank you so much for elaborating more on this topic and helping me understand it. I think what we've really started with Black Fat Femme, and I would even say too, with Carmen's show, right? This notion that the LGBTQ community is much more expansive than what we see in the media. There are so many other facets and so many other conversations that need to be had. Like I'll just say this, and maybe Carmen, you can nod your head or you can chime in, but that plus, right? When you say LGBTQ plus, I really feel like we're now starting to see podcasts and shows and movies showing what that plus is, and seeing that plus, I'll say this as a positive, right? Like seeing the idea of all of the different intersectional experiences you have and being able to reframe them and say, yes, I went through this struggle. I've gone through this, but I've come out on the other side. And I think that's what people are getting from both of our shows, right? This notion that on the other side, there's so much joy and so much, I've stopped using the words resilience because I don't think that word suits me. I think relentlessness, right? This relentlessness to tell your story and fully be immersed in that story, and to be able to remind people that that they can come out joyful on the other side.
Yeah. I think it's a really important point, and especially when you talk about the diversity of voices, even within the LGBTQ plus community, it's so important, and it's something that we've talked about with both of you before, as well as that as we try to bring greater representation into podcasting, this really has to just be the beginning of this, because there's no world where we can launch 4 or 5 podcasts from creators in the community and say like, okay, well, we've done that. Now we're represented, right? And so, it's really important for this to inspire others to want to start podcasts. And as we have a real mission to, to bring more and more voices into it, that we're really never done with that, right? As long as we're launching podcasts, we should be thinking about, the representation within that. But maybe talking about that for a second, is that something, Carmen, when you're creating episodes of the podcast, are you thinking about that with every episode, or is it more, you know what, I'm just trying to make a great podcast, and I just want this good podcast to be out in the world that represents who I am, or do you feel or think through like, okay, this is important for me to do XYZ because I am representing some portion of the LGBTQ plus community?
Yeah, that's a good question. And really what I started out with was, yes, I was really trying to be very intentional with like, making sure I choose lots of different guests and all of that. And at this point in the game, now that I've actually almost got my 12th episode recorded and everything, it's really become about who is willing to just sit down and talk to me, because I do have an interview-based show. It has become about like, who is willing to sit down and chat with me. And so part of my day as producing Beauty Translated has been reaching out to literally as many people as I can possibly think of, through Instagram DM, through email, and just see who responds,
Yeah.
Because it's still kind of a young podcast, and I'm not a celebrity name or anything like that. So I'm really asking people to take a chance and just sit down with me and trust me with their story,
Yeah.
And so what the overarching theme, though, that I try to tackle, I guess, in the podcast is the concept of metronormativity within the LGBT community, which is the concept that LGBTQ plus people only exist in metro spaces. They only exist in large metro areas. But we know that LGBTQ plus people live everywhere in rural areas. And so I'm really trying to talk to people as much as I can, that are from those smaller places that are that you don't hear about a trans person living and thriving. Because I think those things are important, especially because the Southeast is the largest population of transgender Americans in the US. And there's a lot of...
Right? I did not know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. As somebody from the Southeast, I didn't realize that. It's something I have recognized about both of you, and I think is part of why your shows are so fantastic is, a lot of creators jump into it and might sign a deal with a larger podcast network and then sort of step back and say, all I have to do is create the show, and then the network sort of takes it from there. But I like the John's use of the word relentless. And I think it's something that the most talented creators, both of you, in your own sort of unique ways, have, as to your point, Carmen, your willingness to just keep reaching out to potential guests and people to hear your message. John doing very much the same thing, and that it's this combination of having the megaphone of a place like iHeart, where we feel like, we have this opportunity to bring so many voices into podcasting. But when we can partner with creators like yourselves who have this hunger and this desire to just work even harder once you realize you've signed on with somebody, sort of back to John's earlier point about saying, we don't have the choice to just do something and kind of try it out. Like, we have to get it right the first time. And that's what I think was so impressive immediately with your first episodes, is they sounded like shows that have been around for years. Like there was a quality and a charm and a humor and a challenge with all of them. And I think that's so interesting. So just wanted to pause for a second and just say congratulations, because we listen to a lot of shows, and most shows really do need quite a while to sort of find their groove. And not that every show can improve, but it feels like you guys came out of the gate really, really with a clear mission in mind. And, John, coming back to you, where do you want to go with the show? You just launched it. You're a few episodes in. We got to talk about this the other day. We're super excited that we're both ready to jump into another season and renewing both of your shows, for that matter, because they're such fantastic shows, and hopefully for a long time to come. But yeah, I'm curious to hear from you where you want to go with it.
I was like, it's her clap. Oh gosh, no. Will, you, like I said, so I'm just gonna say this. One, I think what made me feel so good about this, and I don't know, Carmen, if you can say this, so I'm gonna just speak for myself. Will, you have been literally such a light to me from the very first time we got on screen together. I literally felt like I was like, wow, Will is my long lost brother. Like, I literally feel like, and I'm not saying this just to say it. I don't give compliments very easily. But I will say that I genuinely believe that, Will, there was just something in you that believed in me. And so, when you ask this question, where do I see the show going? Long as you're along the ride with me, I'm good with wherever the shows go. If we get to a place where, we feel like, okay, the show has run its course, we need to do something different, we need to redream it, I'm okay. If this show takes me to Beyonce's couch, I'm happy to go there too. Like, I'm happy to go wherever this show takes me. But I think the biggest thing for me is that I and it's not even, like I said, I never came into the show of being like, oh, I want to be a star. I want to be the next this or the next that. I genuinely, and I've tweeted this on several occasions. I said, I think for me, it was, how can I create either a blueprint or an opportunity or an ecosystem for other Black queer people to come into and be able to feel like they have a say or some sort of opportunity themselves, right? I think that's where I really want this show to go. I want this show to be either a beacon of light for folks who feel like they don't know where they're going in their lives and need some direction, or a blueprint for folks who are trying to get into the podcasting game and really want to say, I want to do it my way. I want to get away from, this, that, and the other, or I don't want this person to be able to control the way I do my show. And I say, okay, this is how you navigate it. But I think more than anything, I really just wanted this show, and I want this show to continue to be, honestly, the voice and the story and and really the hour that I needed when I was a teenager and didn't have, right? When Will and Grace was helping everybody find themselves, I needed this show, and I'm hoping that this show will eventually be that for other people.
And I have no doubt that it will be that for many, many people. And one of the things I'm so excited about is thinking, this is our first class. This is the first time we've ever done this with Next Up. And to have such brilliant creators like you then be the next group of mentors for some of these people, or just to pass along what you've learned in some ways. And I love to imagine what this looks like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as we continue on this mission to bring greater diversity into the voices that are in podcasting. And just love working with both of you. And you've earned every bit of recognition that you've gotten in this. One of my favorite moments in this program, we have a bi-weekly meeting with the entire podcast team, all of our producers, all of our talent, and it's 150 or so people. And the 8 Next Up participants were on one day to talk about all of your show concepts. I've never seen our group more emotional and more excited and more overwhelmed. And I've never seen more tears from that group of just all of your shared experiences and the passion that you bring to that. Carmen, as we wrap up here, I'm curious to hear, what was that experience like for you, just hearing and getting a chance to chat with the whole podcast team and share your ideas? It felt just like an overwhelming, moment, I think, for everybody there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it really was. It definitely was. I became very emotional myself. I could barely speak. I got choked up on my tears, And, for me, it really was, I was very proud to, of course, share what I was doing, but I don't think I had quite arrived at the moment of like understanding what I was about to do.
Yeah.
Because really, up until the show dropped, I had no idea how any of it was going to be received by, the general public. But I was like, well, everybody at iHeart thinks it sounds great,
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to be awesome. But for me, it was the first time that I was openly talking about myself as a trans person and me sharing these trans stories to a group like that. And so, it allowed me to to understand, like, this is what I'm doing now that I'm making a podcast about the trans experience. Is I am very visibly trans now.
Yeah. I love it. So I want to make sure everybody knows the names once again. So I want to repeat that. If you haven't gotten a chance to check out both of these podcasts, John's podcast is Black Fat Femme. Carmen's podcast is Beauty Translated. Both are so smart, so funny, so charming, but also deal with topics that we need to talk about. And I look forward to working with both of you for a long time to come. So congratulations on what you've built so far. And thanks for spending some time with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And thank all of you for joining us again today. We'll see you again next week.
Podversations is a production of iHeartRadio. You can find more from the biggest names in podcasting on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.